A quiet neighborhood morning turned into a nightmare when Karen, the HOA president, made a call that would shatter the peace. A disabled daughter, known for her kindness and compassion, had opened her door to three freezing dogs abandoned in the snow. But what seemed like a simple act of compassion quickly turned into a nightmare when Karen called the cops, accusing the girl of breaking the neighborhood's rules. The next morning, things escalated further. The police surrounded her house, and what they uncovered would expose Karen's cruelty in a way no one could have predicted. This wasn't just about a simple violation of HOA rules. This was about power, fear, and one woman's desperate attempt to control everything, even when it meant tearing apart a family, trying to do what was right. It was early on a Saturday morning when Mia had decided to take in the three freezing dogs she found shivering outside her door. She had always been a compassionate soul despite her struggles. As a disabled young woman, Mia understood hardship, and when she saw those poor animals, she couldn't bear the thought of leaving them to freeze. She had no way of knowing that this simple, kind gesture would set off a series of events that would shake her life to its core. The neighborhood, normally quiet and filled with neatly manicured lawns, was under the strict rule of the HOA, led by none other than Karen. Everyone knew her, and everyone feared her. With her sharp gaze and quick-to-complain attitude, Karen had become the unofficial ruler of the area. She prided herself on enforcing every single rule with military precision. If you didn't follow the rules, Karen was the first to call attention to it. But Mia hadn't expected Karen to notice the dogs. After all, she had only brought them inside temporarily, hoping to find them a rescue or a loving home. But Karen didn't see it that way. She saw a violation of the HOA rules, an infringement she could not tolerate. A few hours after Mia brought the dogs inside, her phone rang. It was the sound of her nightmare beginning. Mia's phone rang again and again. Each call was from the same number, an unknown caller. Finally, she picked it up, wondering what was going on. She had a feeling something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. "Hello," she answered, her voice still groggy from the early morning. "Is this Mia Thompson?" A stern voice on the other end asked. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "This is Officer Martinez from the local precinct. We've received multiple reports of a disturbance at your address. I need you to step outside and explain yourself." Mia's heart dropped. A disturbance? She hadn't done anything wrong. She had simply taken in three freezing dogs who had nowhere else to go. Why would the police be involved? "Wait, what kind of disturbance?" she asked, her mind racing. "The reports claim you're harboring stray animals. We've been informed that you've violated HOA rules and local ordinances regarding pets. You need to step outside immediately so we can resolve the situation." Mia's stomach twisted into a knot. The police? Over this? Before she could say anything else, the line went dead. Mia quickly ran to the window and looked outside. What she saw sent a chill down her spine. Several police cars were parked along the street. Police officers were standing in her yard, looking toward her house. It was as if she had been accused of a crime, though she had only acted out of kindness. Her mind flashed back to Karen. It had to be her. Karen was the only one in the neighborhood who would call the authorities over something as insignificant as this. Mia's disability, a condition that made it difficult for her to move around and get things done quickly, only added to her anxiety. She had tried to make the best of her situation, dealing with her condition day by day. But now she was facing something far worse. She hadn't expected her good intentions to be met with such hostility. She stepped back from the window, pacing around her small living room. What could she do? Was she in trouble for trying to help these dogs? What if she got in trouble with the law? Or worse, what if they took the dogs away from her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the loud knock on her door. "Knock, knock, knock." "Mia Thompson," a deep voice called through the door. "This is Officer Martinez. We need you to open up." Mia's breath caught in her throat. She quickly moved toward the door and opened it just a crack, her face pale. "Yes?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "We're here to investigate reports that you violated HOA rules," Officer Martinez said bluntly. "We need to see the animals inside your house. Please let us in." Mia stood frozen for a moment, staring at the officers in disbelief. This was really happening. Can I ask why this is such a big deal? Mia finally managed to ask, her voice quiet. I'm just trying to help some abandoned dogs. Officer Martinez's face didn't soften. Ma'am, we're not here to make judgments. We're here because the HOA filed complaints against you for harboring stray animals without proper registration. We need to make sure the animals are safe and that you're following the rules. Now, open the door and step aside. It was then that Mia knew. This wasn't just about the dogs. This was about Karen, the HOA president, using her influence to make Mia's life miserable. Karen had been watching her every move, and now she was using her power to make sure Mia was punished for it. Mia stepped aside, letting the officers enter. The dogs, who had been lying quietly on the couch, looked up at the officers, but didn't move. They were harmless, sweet animals, and yet they were caught up in the chaos that Karen had stirred up. Mia couldn't help but feel a wave of sadness and anger rise within her. How could Karen be so heartless? How could she call the cops on someone trying to help animals in need? The officers inspected the living room, nodding at each other, their presence intimidating. After a few minutes of silence, Officer Martinez turned to Mia. We'll have to confiscate the animals for now, he said, his tone indifferent. You'll need to go through the proper channels to have them registered and approved by the HOA. Until then, they will be taken to a local shelter. No, Mia shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. You can't just take them away. They need me. They've been abandoned, they were freezing outside, and I couldn't just leave them there. I understand your concern, ma'am, the officer said, his tone softer but still firm. But without proper documentation, the law doesn't allow us to let you keep them. Mia stood there, helpless, as the officers walked out with the dogs. She had fought so hard for something that felt so right, but Karen had managed to turn it all into a battle she couldn't win. And it wasn't just the dogs that had been taken from her. It was her sense of safety, her peace of mind, and her belief in the good of people. As the police cars pulled away, Mia stood at the door, watching the dogs being driven away. Karen had won this round, but Jenna wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not after everything she had done. She had fought for the animals, and she would fight for herself too. This wasn't over yet. The cold, unforgiving air outside Mia's house felt like a slap to the face as she stood there, her eyes following the police cars as they drove away, taking the 3 dogs she had tried so hard to help. Mia's heart pounded in her chest, the anger and frustration building up until it felt like a wave crashing over her. How had it come to this? How had a simple act of kindness turned into a full-blown confrontation with the authorities? She stood on her porch for several moments, her hands trembling. The door to her house was wide open, and she could hear the faint sounds of the heater running inside. But it felt like the world had gone eerily quiet, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her. The police had taken the dogs, the last thing she cared about, and with them, they had taken her peace of mind. It had been a few hours since the incident, and Mia's mind still raced. She had no idea how to navigate this situation. The HOA, Karen, the police, it felt like everything was turning against her. How could Karen have done this to her? She had barely known Mia before she called the cops. What could Karen possibly have against a disabled woman who had simply taken in some stray dogs? Mia's head throbbed with confusion and anger. She couldn't just sit there and let it all slide. She couldn't let Karen win. But what could she do? How do you fight back when the odds are stacked against you? Mia decided to go to the one place that made her feel somewhat at ease, the local cafe. It wasn't much, just a small, cozy shop down the street, but it was a place where people didn't judge. At least, that's what Mia hoped. She needed time to think, to clear her head. The quiet atmosphere would give her some relief from the storm of emotions swirling inside. She grabbed her coat and walked out of the house, heading down the street to the cafe. As she passed by Karen's house, Mia couldn't help but glance over. The window blinds were drawn, but she could almost feel Karen's eyes on her from behind them. Was Karen watching her now, just waiting for her next mistake? Mia quickened her pace, trying to shake off the feeling of being hunted. When she arrived at the cafe, the warm air inside welcomed her like a soft embrace. She stepped to the counter, ordered her usual cappuccino, and found a quiet corner near the window. She didn't know who she was avoiding more, Karen or the reality of what had just happened. All Mia wanted to do was sit down, drink her coffee, and forget the chaos. But she couldn't. She couldn't just forget what Karen had done. What was Karen trying to achieve? What had she gained from calling the police on Mia? Mia sat there for a while, staring out the window, watching people pass by. The world outside seemed so normal, so unaffected by what had just happened to her. People were going about their daily lives, oblivious to the storm brewing just around the corner. She was snapped out of her thoughts when her phone buzzed. It was a text from her friend, Lily. "Hey, Mia, I heard what happened. Are you okay? I know you've been trying to help those dogs. I'm so sorry. Let me know if you need anything." Mia let out a long breath, feeling a slight sense of relief. Lily was one of the few people who didn't judge her, who understood her heart. Mia quickly typed a response. "I'm okay, just so frustrated. Karen called the cops on me. Took the dogs away. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing everything." Lily's reply came in seconds. "Karen again, huh? That woman is a nightmare. I'm sure you're doing the right thing, but she's relentless. Let's meet up soon. We'll figure this out together." Mia smiled weakly as she put the phone down. Lily was right. Karen was relentless. Mia had dealt with Karen's petty complaints before, but this was a new level of cruelty. She had to stop letting Karen control her life. She couldn't just sit back and let Karen have her way. That night, after a long day of letting the emotions settle, Mia sat down at her kitchen table with her phone, scrolling through social media. Her notifications were flooded with messages from concerned neighbors. Mia hadn't realized how many people had been watching, how many people knew what Karen was capable of. One message caught her attention. It was from an anonymous account. "We know what Karen's been doing. We can help. She's been pushing too far, and it's time someone stood up to her. If you're serious about fighting back, meet us tomorrow night at the old library. We'll be there." Mia's heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of joke? Who could this possibly be? She read the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. Was this her chance? She debated whether she should go, but something told her this might be her shot at turning the tables. Maybe it wasn't just about the dogs. Maybe it was about more, about putting an end to Karen's reign of terror for good. But who could be offering to help her? Mia wasn't sure, but she knew she couldn't just let Karen have her way any longer. The next evening, Mia walked to the old library, her footsteps echoing in the quiet street. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she had to know who was behind the message. The library was an old, dilapidated building that had been abandoned for years. It looked out of place against the surrounding houses, its windows boarded up, the entrance covered in vines. When Mia arrived, she hesitated for a moment, looking around. But then she saw a shadow move in the doorway. "Over here," a voice whispered. Mia approached cautiously, her heart racing. She could barely make out the figure in the dark. But as she got closer, she recognized the familiar face of James, a neighbor she had always thought of as a quiet, reclusive type. He was part of a group that had quietly resisted Karen's reign in the past. "James," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, we've been watching Karen for a while," he said quietly. "We know what she's capable of. You're not the only one she's hurt." Mia felt a sense of relief wash over her. There were others who had been dealing with Karen's cruelty too. She wasn't alone in this fight. "We need to take her down, Mia," James said, his voice low and determined. "We have information that could destroy her. We just need to use it the right way." Mia nodded. "I'm ready." And just like that, the fight to bring Karen down began in earnest. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning, strategy, and building alliances. Mia's world had shifted once again. What had started as a quiet act of kindness for 3 freezing dogs had turned into a fight for her life, for her future, and for the future of her community. Karen had underestimated her, and now Mia was determined to take back control. The mysterious group led by James wasn't large, but it was made up of people who had seen the worst of Karen's reign. Neighbors who had been silenced for years, victims of Karen's petty rules and cruel tactics. They had all quietly suffered under her, afraid to speak out. But now, they were united in their common goal to expose Karen for the tyrant she was. Mia had met with James, his eyes full of purpose as he laid out the plan. The strategy was simple, but risky. They would need to gather enough evidence to take down Karen, evidence that would not only show her as a petty dictator, but also reveal her deeper, more dangerous ties to the underground networks Mia's family had once been a part of. Karen had been using her position as HOA president to enrich herself and exploit the community. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. Mia had known that Karen had connections to powerful figures, but now she realized the extent of the corruption. It wasn't just about controlling the neighborhood. Karen was part of something far bigger, and Mia's family's legacy was key to it all. But with every new piece of information they uncovered, Mia's fear grew. She was about to dive into a world she didn't fully understand, a world of power, crime, and manipulation. And in that world, Karen was a force to be reckoned with. But Mia wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. The evening of the meeting at the old library was tense. Mia walked in, her heart pounding with nerves. James had warned her that Karen had eyes everywhere. But Mia wasn't going to let that stop her. The library had once been a place of knowledge, a hub of information, and tonight it would be the place where they would gather the information they needed to end Karen's reign. James was already there, along with a few others. Mia recognized them as neighbors she had seen around, but never really spoken to. One was Margaret, a woman in her mid-50s who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Margaret had been one of the first to speak out against Karen, although her complaints had always been ignored. Another was Derek, a quiet man who worked as a handyman in the neighborhood. He had done work for several of Karen's properties, and he knew a lot about her dealings, though he had always kept it to himself. "All right," James said as Mia took a seat. "We've got what we need to bring Karen down. But we have to act fast." Mia looked at the group, her eyes scanning their faces. They all seemed determined, but she could see the fear in their eyes too. They were risking everything by going against Karen. But Mia couldn't back down. Not now. James continued, his voice steady. "We've been compiling everything. The financial records, the emails, the things we've heard from Karen's own employees. There's no way she can get out of this once it's all laid out." Mia nodded, trying to steady her nerves. "What's the next step?" Margaret leaned forward. "We need to get this to the right people. Journalists, law enforcement, whoever will listen. The more people who know the truth, the harder it will be for Karen to cover it up. She's too powerful. But if we flood the media with evidence, she won't be able to silence us." James tapped a file on the table. "We've already reached out to a few reporters. They've agreed to help us expose Karen's corruption. But we need to make sure we have everything lined up before we make the next move. If we push too soon, she'll just bury it. We need to hit her where it hurts." "Where do we start?" Mia asked, her voice quiet but resolute. James stood up, pacing slowly. "We start with the connections. Karen's been getting away with this because of her ties to powerful people. But I've been digging, and I've found some links between her and shady construction companies. People who've been paying her off to get permits and approval for illegal projects. And we can prove it." Derek spoke up, his voice low but determined. "I've worked on a few of those projects. I've seen the contracts, the under-the-table deals. If we can get those papers, we've got her." Mia took a deep breath. It was starting to feel real. This was the beginning of something big, the kind of battle that could change everything. And as scared as she was, she knew she had no choice. Karen had already taken the dogs away from her. What would Karen do next? Margaret's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've got a list of people who've been exploited by Karen. People who've had to pay extra for services, people who've had their homes devalued because of her schemes. They'll back us up. We just need to keep pushing." James nodded. "Exactly. We have to make sure that we keep the pressure on Karen. We've got the evidence and we have the people. Once we've gone public, there's no turning back. She won't be able to silence us." Mia's chest tightened. It was all so much bigger than she had ever imagined. But it was the only way to win. She had to see it through, for her family, for the people in the neighborhood who had suffered in silence for so long, and for the 3 freezing dogs she had tried to save who had become the catalyst for this whole chain of events. "We're ready," Mia said, her voice steady with newfound conviction. "Let's take her down." The next morning, the plan was set in motion. The team had reached out to the reporters, and they had agreed to meet. The first story would be released that afternoon, detailing Karen's involvement with the construction companies and her exploitation of the neighborhood residents. The evidence was airtight. There was no way Karen could wiggle out of this one. Mia sat in her small apartment, her hands shaking slightly as she watched the news unfold on her TV. Her phone buzzed with messages of support from the neighbors. The first story was out, and Karen's name was already being linked to corruption and fraud. But Mia knew this was just the beginning. Karen would retaliate. She would come after them, just as she always did. But Mia was ready. She wasn't going to let Karen control her life anymore. As the day wore on, the news reports kept coming in. Karen's name was being dragged through the mud, and it wasn't long before her own supporters began to turn on her. The community was starting to see the truth, and Mia, the quiet, compassionate woman who had been targeted for her kindness, had become the face of resistance. It was happening. Karen was losing control. The days that followed the release of the first article were a blur of media coverage, tense meetings, and unexpected twists. The truth was finally out there, and Karen's carefully crafted empire of lies and intimidation was beginning to crumble. But Mia knew better than to think it would be that easy. Karen wasn't going down without a fight. The police had yet to take action, but Mia could already feel the wheels of retaliation starting to turn. The HOA building, which had once been an imposing symbol of Karen's control, now felt like a battlefield. Every neighbor who had once feared speaking up now rallied behind Mia, sending messages of support and sharing their own stories of Karen's abuses. It was a new chapter for the neighborhood, one filled with hope, but also uncertainty. Mia had tried to live a quiet life. Her disability had kept her from fully engaging with the world around her, but the events of the past few weeks had forced her to confront a side of life she had never expected. Power, corruption, and greed weren't just things that happened to other people. They were things that had been happening right under her nose, and she had unknowingly been part of it. The revelation that her family's legacy was tied to the very people she was now fighting made the stakes higher than ever. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child, for the future, and for the community that had been damaged by Karen's actions for far too long. The morning after the first story broke, Mia found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. The text messages from neighbors had been pouring in all night, and while it was comforting to know that she had support, the reality of what was happening hit her hard. The world was watching now, and Karen would do anything to save herself. The boy, James, as she had come to think of him, had warned her that the fight wasn't over. "Karen won't go down easily," he had said. "She'll lash out. But we have the evidence. We have the truth. And truth is the strongest weapon we have." Still, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they were only getting started. She had heard stories about people like Karen, those who had used their power and influence to manipulate the system, to stay on top no matter the cost. And if Karen had learned anything over the years, it was how to play dirty. Mia's phone buzzed again, and she quickly glanced at the screen. It was a message from Margaret. "Mia, we need to talk. It's urgent." The urgency in Margaret's words sent a ripple of unease through Mia's chest. She quickly typed a response. "What's happened? Can't say much over text. Meet me at the cafe in 30 minutes?" Mia's heart raced. Something was off. She quickly gathered her coat and left the apartment, the cold air hitting her face as she stepped outside. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. Karen wasn't just going to sit back and let this play out. The cafe was a small, cozy place on the corner of Main Street, a familiar refuge for Mia when she needed a break from the chaos. When she arrived, She found Margaret sitting at their usual table, her hands folded in front of her, her face pale and drawn. "Mia," Margaret said as Mia approached, her voice tight with worry. "We've got a problem." Mia took a seat across from her. "What's going on? What happened?" Margaret leaned forward, glancing around nervously as if she were afraid someone might be listening. "It's Karen. She's been making calls. We think she's preparing to strike back." Mia's stomach sank. "Strike back? What does that mean?" "She's reached out to some of her old allies," Margaret explained, "the ones she's worked with in the past. There's talk of her trying to get you arrested for harboring stray animals, the same dogs she had the police take. She's trying to flip the narrative, make you out to be the villain." Mia felt a chill run down her spine. "Arrested? For saving the dogs?" Margaret nodded grimly. "Yes, she's working behind the scenes trying to get the local authorities on her side. She's also trying to gather some evidence that you're involved in something illegal. It's all fabricated, but we can't underestimate her." Mia's mind was racing. How far would Karen go to save herself? She knew Karen had connections, but this was next level. Karen wasn't just trying to ruin her reputation anymore. She was trying to destroy her life. "We need to expose her," Mia said firmly. "We need to beat her at her own game." Margaret nodded, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "We have the evidence, yes, but we need to act fast. We can't wait for her to make the first move. She's already trying to manipulate the police, and if we don't move now, it could all fall apart." Mia's hands tightened into fists on the table. The weight of the situation was starting to crush her, but she couldn't back down now. She had to protect herself, her child, and the people she cared about. And that meant fighting back hard. "We'll go public," Mia said, determination flooding her voice. "We can't wait for Karen to make the next move. We need to show the world who she really is. She's been getting away with it for too long. It's time for it to stop." Margaret looked at Mia, her expression softening. "I'm with you. We all are. We've got your back. But we need to make sure the right people see this. We need to take this to the news, get the media involved. Once the truth is out there, there'll be no turning back for her." Mia nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Later that evening, as Mia and Margaret sat in front of the computer, preparing the next round of evidence to send to local reporters, Mia felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The stakes had never been higher, and with each passing hour, Karen seemed to get more desperate. The emails, the documents, and the testimonies, it was all coming together, but Mia knew that the hardest part was still ahead. James had been right. They weren't just fighting a woman who controlled a neighborhood. They were fighting a system that had been built on lies, fear, and manipulation. And Mia wasn't going to let that system win. As they finished drafting their final message to the reporters, Mia sat back, her mind exhausted but her resolve stronger than ever. The truth was on their side, and no matter how far Karen went, Mia was ready to make sure that truth came to light. The next morning, as the first stories about Karen's corruption began to hit the media, Mia could feel the momentum shift. The community had already started to rally behind her, and the fear that had once held them captive was slowly beginning to crumble. Karen's supporters, the ones who had long been loyal to her, were starting to waver, and soon they would have no choice but to face the truth. But Karen wasn't going down quietly. Mia could feel it. The final confrontation was coming, and she had no idea what lengths Karen would go to protect herself. All Mia could do was prepare and stand firm in the face of the storm. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable as the days passed. Mia had thought that the worst of it was behind her, that once the media got involved, the truth would come pouring out, and Karen's empire of manipulation would collapse. But as the news stories about Karen's illegal activities spread, so did her retaliation. It wasn't just about the dogs anymore. Karen was fighting for control of everything Mia had built. And Karen wasn't about to let go without a fight. Mia sat in her apartment, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. She hadn't been able to sleep much, her mind racing with thoughts of the next step in the fight. The evidence was out there, the media was on their side, but Karen's tactics were growing more desperate by the day. Mia had already received several anonymous threats, phone calls, and even letters warning her to stop the campaign against Karen or else face the consequences. But Mia wasn't scared. Not anymore. She had come too far, and there was too much at stake. She was fighting for more than just her reputation. She was fighting for her future, for the safety of her unborn child, and for the community that had been under Karen's thumb for far too long. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was James. "We've got a problem, Mia." The message was short, but the urgency in his words was clear. "What now?" Mia quickly dialed his number. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "Karen's making her move," James replied, his voice tight. "She's trying to get the police to press charges against you. Not just for the dogs, for everything. She's accusing you of running some kind of illegal animal shelter. She's even thrown in some bogus charges about fraud. If she can tie you into a criminal case, she can destroy your credibility." Mia's heart raced. Fraud? It was a tactic Mia had expected. Karen would stop at nothing to discredit her and make her look like the villain. But this was more than just a threat. This was the beginning of the next phase in the battle. Karen was going all in. "What can we do?" Mia asked, fear creeping into her voice. "If she gets the cops involved, it could be over." "We fight back," James said, a note of determination in his voice. "But we need more than just the media. We need to hit her where it hurts, in her wallet. I've got contacts, people who've worked with Karen before. If we can tie her illegal activities to money laundering or any other financial crime, it'll be game over for her." Mia nodded, even though James couldn't see her. "How do we do that?" "We gather more evidence. We go straight to the financial records, look for discrepancies, and use her connections to expose what she's really been doing behind the scenes. We need something she can't wriggle out of." Mia sat back in her chair, absorbing the weight of his words. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. This was about taking Karen down once and for all. But it would require patience, precision, and a deep dive into things Mia had never imagined she'd have to deal with. But she had no choice. The following morning, Mia met with James and the group at their usual spot, a small, unmarked office on the edge of town where they could work without Karen's spies noticing. James had gathered a few more allies, including Derek, the handyman who had worked for Karen, and Margaret, who had already become one of Mia's closest supporters. Together, they formed the backbone of the resistance, but they knew they couldn't do this alone. "We need to get access to Karen's financial records," James said, his eyes scanning the room. "And I think I know how we can do that." Mia leaned forward, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. "How?" "I have an old friend who works at a local accounting firm," James explained. "They handle some of the businesses Karen's involved with. If we can get them to dig up some records, we might be able to find something, anything, that can tie her to the criminal activities we know she's been involved in." Derek chimed in, his voice low but filled with certainty. "Karen's always been careful with money, but she's not as untouchable as she thinks. People like her always slip up eventually. We just need to find the right thread." Mia nodded, her mind racing. The idea of going after Karen's finances felt like the right move, but she knew the risks. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous this became. Karen had too many connections, too many people in positions of power. But there was no turning back now. Mia was all in. "Okay," Mia said, her voice firm. "Let's do it. We find the evidence and we expose her. If we can take her down financially, it'll be the end of her hold over the neighborhood." James smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Exactly. Now let's get to work." For the next few days, Mia, James, and the others worked tirelessly. They gathered documents, reviewed financial statements, and even enlisted the help of a few insiders who had been previously too afraid to speak out against Karen. Slowly but surely, they began to uncover the hidden web of corruption that Karen had carefully spun over the years. Each new discovery was a blow to Karen's carefully constructed world. They found payments to off-the-books contractors, unreported fees that had been siphoned into Karen's personal account, and even shady deals that had gone unnoticed for years. Every piece of evidence was more damning than the last, and Mia could feel the pressure mounting. But the closer they got to the truth, the more desperate Karen became. She wasn't going to just let this happen. Karen's phone calls grew more frequent, her threats more pointed. Mia received another anonymous letter in her mailbox, this one filled with warnings. Stay out of it or you'll regret it. But Mia wasn't afraid. She couldn't afford to be. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the community that had suffered in silence for too long, about the people who had been living under Karen's thumb, too scared to speak up. On the 5th day of their investigation, they finally found the smoking gun. It was a series of wire transfers linking Karen's account to several offshore companies, companies that had been set up to hide the profits from her illicit activities. They had her. The evidence was irrefutable. Mia stood in front of the computer, her eyes scanning the documents on the screen. Her heart raced as she realized they had what they needed. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The truth about Karen's financial dealings, about the corruption that had allowed her to maintain control, was right in front of her. This is it, Mia said quietly, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and triumph. We have everything we need. James looked over her shoulder, a grin spreading across his face. We've got her now. But as Mia sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They had the evidence, but Karen was still out there. She was still a threat. And Mia knew it wouldn't be long before Karen came for her, just like she had before. But this time, Mia was ready. Mia had spent so many nights worrying about Karen, thinking about how to defeat her. But now, as she sat in front of the computer with the damning evidence spread out before her, a sense of resolve settled over her. She wasn't going to wait for Karen to make her next move. She was going to take the fight to Karen. The next morning, Mia stood in front of her bathroom mirror, the reflection staring back at her, a reminder of how far she had come and how much was still at stake. Her nerves were on edge, her mind racing. The game was about to change, and she knew she had to be ready. But as much as she was prepared to face Karen head-on, she couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the entire community, the people who had suffered under Karen's iron fist for far too long, and it was about her child, her future. The phone buzzed on the countertop, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from James. Meeting at 2 p.m. Bring the evidence. It's time. Mia stared at the message for a moment. The time had come. She had the proof, the wire transfers, the shady business dealings, everything she needed to bring Karen down. But with Karen's influence still strong in the community, Mia knew that the fight was far from over. The meeting place was a small cafe at the edge of town, a quiet, unassuming spot where they could discuss their next steps without drawing attention. Mia walked in, her heart racing as she looked around. James was already there, sitting at a corner table, his laptop open in front of him. Derek and Margaret, who had been her strongest supporters, were sitting nearby. Everyone was here, and it felt like the calm before the storm. Mia took a seat at the table, the weight of the evidence still heavy in her bag. As she opened it and laid the documents out in front of them, a hush fell over the group. The reality of what they were about to do sank in. This wasn't just about taking down Karen. This was about shaking the very foundation of the community and exposing the truth that had been buried for far too long. We've got it, James said, breaking the silence. This is everything we need. If we release this, Karen won't stand a chance. Mia nodded, but we need to make sure she can't twist it. We need to go public in the right way. Margaret leaned forward, her face serious. The media will be the key. If we get the right journalists involved, we can make sure Karen's network of corruption is exposed for everyone to see. We've already got a few reporters lined up. They're ready to run the story, but we need to make sure we've covered all the angles. Asterisk, asterisk, Mia's hands shook as she reached for the papers, her fingers brushing the edges of the file. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Karen is already making her move. I can feel it. I know she's going to retaliate. If we don't act first, we'll lose everything. James looked at Mia, his gaze steady. I agree. We can't wait any longer. This is our moment. We go public with the story we bring in the media, and we make sure the community knows everything Karen's been hiding. As the meeting continued, the group worked together to finalize the plan. They knew that releasing the information wasn't going to be easy. They had to be smart. Karen had power. She had connections that stretched far beyond the neighborhood, and Mia knew that she wouldn't stop at just manipulating the HOA rules. She would do anything to protect her secrets, even if it meant destroying Mia's life in the process. It wasn't long before they had everything ready. James had lined up a trusted journalist from a local news outlet, someone who had been following Karen's activities for years, but had never been able to break through her defenses. This was their shot. At exactly 2 p.m., Mia and the team sent the files over to the journalist, their hearts pounding as the digital message confirmed the delivery. It was done. The evidence was in the hands of someone who could expose Karen for who she really was. Mia took a deep breath. This was it. There was no going back. As the afternoon passed, the silence was deafening. Mia couldn't sit still, her anxiety growing with every passing minute. The weight of the situation, the fear of Karen's retaliation, was starting to take its toll. She had put everything on the line, and now all she could do was wait for the storm to hit. Then, at 4 p.m., Mia's phone buzzed. The message read, "The story is live." Mia's heart stopped for a beat. She opened the link and read the headline. HOA President Karen Hughes exposed in massive corruption scheme. How her illegal activities destroyed the neighborhood. The article went into detail about Karen's financial dealings, her corrupt practices, and her abuse of power. The police had already been contacted, and an investigation was underway. The whole story was out in the open, and Karen's reign was over. Mia sat back in her chair, the relief flooding over her like a wave. But it didn't last long. As she scrolled through the article, she saw Karen's response, which had already gone viral. "This is all lies. Mia Thompson is a criminal, a fraudster, and a thief. She's trying to ruin my reputation because she can't accept the truth. Do not believe her." Mia felt her blood run cold. She had expected Karen to retaliate, but the speed at which Karen was trying to discredit her was unnerving. Karen wasn't backing down. In fact, she was doubling down. But this time, Karen had made a critical mistake. The truth was out there. And now, it wasn't just Mia's word against Karen's. It was the entire community's, the journalists, the neighbors who had come forward, and the irrefutable evidence Mia and her team had gathered. They couldn't be silenced anymore. The next few days were a whirlwind. The media coverage continued to grow, and Karen's attempts to discredit Mia only made her look more guilty. The pressure was mounting, but Mia didn't flinch. The community rallied behind her, and support for Karen quickly began to crumble. The police investigation was in full swing, and it became clear that Karen's illegal activities were too much for her to cover up. Even some of her closest allies started to distance themselves. But Mia wasn't done yet. Karen's influence might be slipping, but she wasn't finished fighting. Mia knew Karen would make one final, desperate attempt to regain control. Mia had prepared herself for this moment. This fight wasn't just for her. It was for the community. It was for every person Karen had tried to crush under her heel. As the sun set that evening, Mia stood on her porch, looking out over the neighborhood. It was almost over. The final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. And Mia was ready to make sure that Karen would never hurt anyone again. The battle isn't over yet, and you have the power to make a difference. Mia's fight against Karen is a reminder that standing up for what's right isn't just about one person's story. It's about exposing the truth, fighting against corruption, and making sure that justice prevails. But now we want to hear from you. Do you think Karen will fight back? What would you do if you were in Mia's shoes? Have you ever experienced something like this in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about how we can all make a stand when it's needed most. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter in this fight. There's more to come, and you won't want to miss it. If you're inspired by Mia's courage, hit that like button and share the story. Let's spread the word and let Karen and everyone else like her know that the truth can't be buried. Thanks for following along. And remember, the fight for justice never stops. We're all in this together.